for being here today, joining us at the panel stage. I'm really excited to welcome this great group on stage for the Secret to High Performance Teams. My name is Tori Callahan. I am a lead marketing strategist at Classy, and I hope that you can join me in welcoming this all-star crew. So our moderator today is Cindy Jones-Nyland. She is the co-founder and principal at Dandelion Bright. We also have with us Danny Kim, who is a speaker, author, and consultant for the Dauphini Group, as well as Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego. We also have Jake Wood, who's the co-founder and president of Team Rubicon. And last but not least, Chandani Porteous, the CEO of Wipe Out Kids Cancer. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Cindy and get started.
Thanks, Tori. They've told us to talk really loud, so let me know if this ends up being yelling. Thank you, Tori, for that great introduction. So today we're going to talk about high-performing teams, and I think it's a topic that a lot of panels have touched on, and we've had conversations as business leaders and as organizations. And we've got three really great dynamic leaders with us this morning that I think we'll learn some lessons from, and we'll have a really good conversation regarding how they show up as leaders, what they've seen to be successful, and how they prepare in their organizations, how they lead with effective communications, and really how they bring their own style into the organizations that they're a part of. I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, and then I'd love for us just to have a conversation. So we've got some questions we're going to ask, and we're going to cover some things, but we also want this to be interactive, so we'll probably stop and make sure that we engage with all of you. And then Tori's kind enough, she's going to stop us at about 15 minutes, and we're going to have time for official Q&A. So with that, Tori introduced me. I'm Cindy Jones-Nyland. I was here last year, and I laughed because I accidentally got on stage, and it was a great panel, and I enjoyed it. And we talked a lot about authentic leadership. And I laughed at the time because I was preparing to take a sabbatical for a year. I spent some time working with the Classy folks when I was the Chief Marketing Officer for Heifer International, and I was transitioning at that point. And my husband laughs and says, "That wasn't a sabbatical. I don't know what you were thinking. I was busier this past year than I've ever been." So it's been a really great year, and I'm doing a lot of work with Chandani at Wipe Out Kids Cancer, so it's been a lot of fun. And with that, I'm going to let Danny introduce himself, and then we'll go around and get started on questions.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me? How many of you are just so excited that the weather dropped like 20 degrees? Shoo!
That was good.
That was great leadership, yeah. Well, hey, I'm glad to be here. I hope that our time could be really effective and that we can answer some questions. But just a little bit about me. I am a career coach at Point Loma Nazarene University. I help young millennials figure out their passion and purpose. And so maybe you're here going, what's my purpose? What's my passion? I'd love to talk to you about that. But also, too, I'm a leadership development coach and consultant. I use the StrengthsFinder assessment. How many of you guys have heard of that before? Okay, cool. And about 3 months ago, I got a chance to do the corporate retreat for Classy to do their StrengthsFinders retreat. So I got to see a lot of them here this morning, this week, and it's been really fun. This is a little bit about me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about strengths and what it means to use a strengths-based philosophy in leadership, right? Not a weakness-fixing approach, but how do we take strengths to another level to actually build high-performing teams? So I'm excited to be here.
So my name's Jake Wood, also very happy to be here. I'm co-founder and chief executive officer of a nonprofit organization called Team Rubicon. We recruit and train military veterans for disaster response. So over the last 7.5 years, we've grown to about 50,000 volunteers across the country, and we have a full-time staff of about 70. So I've certainly had to learn a lot about leadership in the context of being a young social entrepreneur. I was a social entrepreneur by accident after we co-founded the organization 7 years ago. Prior to that, I served 4 years in the Marine Corps, led an infantry squad in the Anbar province of Iraq during the surge in 2007, and then served as a scout sniper in a sniper team in Afghanistan in 2008.
Well, I was not a sniper. I could barely get up on the stage, but Jake helped me, so that's great. My name's Chandani Porteous, and I'm just honored to be here, grateful to be here with all of you. My background has always been in nonprofit and in health, and so I started off as a research assistant, shuffling papers and doing that kind of grunt work, and I loved it. And then I grew into working with some of the greatest nonprofits in cancer. So I worked at Susan G. Komen as their chief mission officer for over a decade, and then went through some kind of crisis and turnaround while there at that organization. And then was recruited over to Livestrong to come on the board and kind of do the same thing there post Lance and the doping scandal. And then most recently have joined Wipe Out Kids Cancer, which is near and dear to my heart, obviously, cancer especially, but cancer in children. So I'm excited to be here. Look forward to our conversation.
So I think, many of the topics that we want to cover around authenticity, communication, building trust, accountability, all the things that play a role in what we want to define as high-performing teams. And each of these leaders bring a very different perspective. And I hope that when we leave today, that one of the things that we accomplish is we understand that, every leader leads differently, and that application may mean different things in terms of the definition of high-performing teams and an organization's culture. And the transition from leaderships and other things really are all about what each person brings to it. And I think, there's no one size fits all. And I think it's really important in this group. I think we'll provide some really unique perspectives based on their background and some of the things that they do today, as well as what they've done in the past. So I'm going to start with some formal questions, and I'm going to start with you, Jake. One of the things we talked about as we were preparing for this session, Jake shared with us, some of the things that he's seen in terms of developing teams and how important it is to have mutual accountability and respect. And he's built an organization in the past 7 years that has grown to include 75 employees and over 50,000 volunteers that are deployed all around the world. So being able to mobilize that large group of people means you have to lead really dynamically. And one of the words he used when we talked was everyone has to be a plank holder. And I found that really fascinating. And so I wanted him to elaborate this morning a little bit on what that means and how you see that in your leadership and what you bring in terms of how that fits your personal philosophy.
Sure. So, as we've been building the organization over the last couple of years, we had a couple of things that we really wanted to focus on early that we thought were going to be critical to whether we were successful or not. And when I think about leadership, I think about leadership really comes down to two fundamental things. And if you get them right, then you're 80% of the way there. The first one is establishing the vision for a team. The second one is really establishing a culture for your organization that helps contribute to mission success. So when we're talking about culture, from a very early stage, we really wanted to build a culture that made everyone feel as though they were a part, an owner of that culture. In the nonprofit sector, we don't have equity that we can give away to our employees to attract and retain talent. So what is it that we can give them that gives them some sense of ownership in the organization? And for us, it's really, owning the mission and owning the culture. And in order to do that, what we settled on early on is you have to reduce the stratification of your organization. So, I come out of the military, and most people would make the assumption that the military, with its rank structure, is super hierarchical, and as a result, you would have this natural stratification. And in some ways, you do. But on the teams that I worked on, particularly this Scout Sniper team in Afghanistan, we had a team leader, and he was an amazing Marine and a great leader. But he really reduced that stratification down to the point where we were all equals, and he was first among peers in his methodology for leading us. And I've tried to really bring that same approach to Team Rubicon. How is it that we can make every single member of the team, from myself at the chief executive level all the way down to our volunteers, feel like they own and contribute to and take from that culture? And so we talk about everybody being a plank holder. When we're interviewing people, we ask them questions about how they're going to contribute to our culture, because it's not just about assimilation, it's about actually adding value back into it. And at the end of the day, you can do this well if every single member, every single stakeholder of your organization has a common identity. In our organization, in Team Rubicon, we refer to everyone that's a member of our organization as gray shirts. It's a reference to the uniform that we wear when we go out and we do our work in the field. And we're all gray shirts at the end of the day. So whether you're the CEO, myself, or you're the newest gray shirt volunteer who's out on a mission today, we're all gray shirts. And that gives this sense of ownership from top to bottom. But it's really about collapsing that organization down vertically from a cultural perspective?
I think one of the points that I'm fascinated by is the idea that everyone is equal. And one of the things that I've talked to lots of leaders about is don't ask anyone on your team to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. And I think that's really important, and that's a great example of that. So one of the other things we talked about, and I'm going to direct this at Chandani, was around building culture and balancing that some with personal and professional, and bringing your authentic self to leadership. There was some discussion yesterday about on the abundance at the main stage. If you all went to Jeff Shuck and the Plenty panel about authentic leadership and what that means. And Chandani, you've been involved as a young leader in lots of different turnaround and challenging circumstances. And so I know as nonprofits, we're also constrained with resources. So that means bringing a completely different style sometimes into the workplace from a leadership perspective. So can you talk a little bit about how you found success in the challenging times and how you balance that with personal and professional to motivate teams?
Yeah, sure. I think, sometimes it's just getting past the denial of what you're in. If you're in a really difficult situation, if you're in the middle of crisis, if your organization had been at the peak of its height, I'll give you the example of Susan G. Komen, was there during those days where we were nearly a $500 million company, and then, had some missteps where we defunded Planned Parenthood and then refunded Planned Parenthood, and we saw a 40% decline in revenue in a year. And that is something that's very hard to come back from. I would tell you that you kind of stop and you ask yourself, why was I ever here to begin with? You stop and you look at your teams and you remind them what our mission really was. And thankfully, as Chief Mission Officer, that was forefront of my mind. But I think, you have to lead forward, continuing to show the example that you're not going to give up. And you're going to fight. And you're going to fight for the mission that you knew needed to be served. And so I think it's really interesting, Jake, when you talk about the culture, what that kind of crisis and controversy can do to a culture is almost hard to ever rebound from. I will tell you, in having done turnarounds, you almost have to look at them as restarts, because there are so many emotional hurts that come with the fact that so many people help build that organization or build that mission, and then because of something somebody else did, is always typically how it's put, all of their work has gone to what, right? The same situation when I went into Turnaround Live Strong. That was a very hard situation because there were a lot of people that were very angry, naturally, because the work that we were doing were serving the people that needed it the most. And what I found was that it was okay to be frustrated as a leader and to let my team see that. It was okay to be able to say, listen, things shouldn't happen the way that they happened, but we have to move forward, and we have to move forward together. And if we can't band together to really say that these are the next steps and this is the vision that we are setting forward for a turnaround, then we can't do this as a team. And then you have to make really difficult decisions, and a lot of restructuring happens. People have to leave the organization. That's just the fact of kind of how it works. And when that happens, that is a deeper cultural hit, I think it's also kind of to your point about being a young leader. I was in my 20s when I was doing a lot of this work, and then crept kind of into my 30s, everybody, yes. But during those times as well, I was, was the youngest executive female woman of color, and I was having 4 babies in 3 years. And I will tell you that that was hard. That was really hard, but I also felt like I owed it to every woman out there to prove that it could be done. And I also wasn't going to stand for the fact that I wanted to nurse my babies and I needed a flexible schedule to make that happen, because it is not easy to nurse twins, and it just isn't easy to have babies in the first place. We all know this. And then they talk and they walk and then you're responsible for them, and you gotta that's your high performing team right there, So I remember saying, you know what? I'm not going to say no. I'm going to push the envelope, and I'm going to fight for what I think is right. And as a leader, what I realized is that, I was the very first remote employee that we ever hired at one of the companies as a test, I was like, oh, great. Now, if I screw this up, then it's all screwed up for everybody. But then at the end of the day, I was able to recruit probably 80 amazing scientists and talent that I could have never recruited to Dallas. But I was able to do it because we created a remote workforce, and it was one of the most loyal workforces I have ever seen. And I think, you fight for what's right, you set that vision of where we could be, and then you go after it yourself. And I think as an executive, I'll also say, one of the things an executive has to sacrifice is that flexibility and all that kind of stuff, and yes, go to yoga whenever you want, as long as you get your work done. The CEO doesn't do it though, And so I would also say it was a learning lesson for me that I, maybe had built teams that were able to have those benefits, but I burned myself out and I didn't watch out for myself. And so as an executive, I would also say, that's something that probably I should ask Danny to coach me on, Yeah.
So I think that's a great segue. Thank you for that, because it's very much representation of being a very authentic leader and actually not only showing up the way you want to show up, but allowing leadership to meet others where they are. And I think we've heard that as a theme as well. And so Danny, can you talk to us a little bit? I know you meet with lots of executives and lots of organizations, and you facilitate dialogues around finding people's strengths and aligning strength to talent. And I think Chandani and Jake both have touched on that, but can you talk a little bit about that and what you see in your work?
Absolutely. Hey, if you're here this morning, across the world, we don't have enough time and resources to waste. Would you guys agree with that? In a recent research article, every single year, the U.S. loses $960 billion to lack of engagement and bad management. Right? That's data for you right there, right? So this is the kind of research that's coming out right now. And there's a fundamental shift in organizations that need to be taking place from bosses to coaches. What's the fundamental difference between a boss and a coach? A boss tells you what to do. It's that kind of hierarchical stride and kind of strategy and structure, where coaches go, hey, what's your goal? What do you want to do? And let me help you get there, right? No matter what kind of level of organization, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're middle management, kind of really shaping the way that we look at management is going to be fundamentally different. There's a transition that's happening right now. One of the things that I love talking about with executives and people on teams is figuring out what their strengths are. And that's not just a fluffy word that's a pat on the back, but it's actually saying, and Gallup would say that your strengths and your talents are naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied. Naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied. Remember the last moment when you were doing something and you didn't even think about it. You were successful at it, people said you did a great job, and you could do it over and over and over again. And I think part of authentic leadership is going, what are my flow moments? What are those moments of experiences where I could do it over and over and over again? Because when you do, you're 6 times more likely to enjoy that job, 3 times more likely to have a better quality of life, and 7.8% times more likely to be productive. And so that's what I love doing, is actually taking this philosophy of strengths-based leadership and saying, what will you do with it? And then, how do you look at your team as strengths-based? Right? Not a liability, not a weakness, but saying, what do you have to offer to this vision that we're all about? And then how do I kind of unleash you towards that? I don't think we're in a better season of time in history to do that. I work with millennials every single day, and the number one thing that they want is purpose. And when you can align their talent with purpose, we could literally change the world. I really believe that. And so I'm excited to be here and talk to you guys about that, because I think when we start tapping into our strengths, we have a better workforce in general.
Danny, the idea of purpose, I mean, I feel his energy. It's palpable. You can coach me. One of the other things we talked about on our prep call, and I think it plays into purpose, is the idea of the energy that you cultivate internally in your organization is the energy that also gets put out to your donors or your customers. And for many of us, that is our donors or the people that support our missions. And Jake, you talked a little bit about that's our equity, our culture, and the things that we have in our brand. That's our equity. And so, can each of you talk a little bit about how you cultivate energy in order for that same energy to be transferred to the external part of the organization, because I think that's, whether it's challenging times or really great times, you know, that spectrum is really important when you're trying to find resources and find funders. And I'd like to explore that a little bit. So do you want to start that conversation?
Sure. I love using this analogy. You guys remember back in the day there was a Pony Express, right? The Pony Express was how you got mail delivered. Obviously, it's changed significantly since then. But there's this kind of adage that says, don't worry about the mail getting there, just worry about the horse. Because when you worry about the horse and you take care of the horse, the mail will always get there. And I think sometimes we care a lot about the product or the mission, which is extremely important. But where I kind of love focusing on is understanding the people behind it. Right? When you take care of yourself, one, as a leader, when you understand who you are, your identity, what makes you tick, what energizes you, what keeps you up at night, what makes you cry. And then also, too, when you understand your team and say, what do you need to accomplish the goals that are set in front of you? When you can truly understand them, you have an opportunity to really make a difference, right? So when we talk about engaging clients, engaging customers, we have to really think, what's your first team? You know, who's your first team, right? When you lose an employee, how much time does it take to fill their shoes? Way too much time, right? So why don't we just invest in the people right now that we have right now? Why don't you invest in yourself? Because we don't want to get burnt out, right? As Shantisa was saying, we don't want to waste time on ourselves to be burnt out so that we can't accomplish the goals that are set before us.
Yeah, the pony analogy is actually perfect because it aligns totally with one of the cultural maxims that we have at Team Rubicon, which is the big overarching one that we have is mission first, gray shirt always. We exist for our mission, that is serving people on their worst day after a disaster. But we know that. We're already aligned behind that mission. So if we take care of our gray shirts, if we take care of our volunteers and our staff, then we're going to be able to maximize impact in that mission. So everything that we do is designed to maximize team performance by aligning them behind that purpose. So we do a couple of things. Our staff, we have an official, unofficial mandate that every single staff member gets out on a disaster response deployment at least every single year. Now, that can't be official because of HR regulations and workers' comp classification, so hopefully there are no state auditors here. But it's about going out, and when our staff members, myself included, go out to the field, we're not just walking around with a clipboard and observing. I tell my staff members, you will be the dirtiest person that comes back to the operating base that night. You will be the filthiest person. If you're not, you failed, because you're representing us, and that's ultimately how you reconnect around the missions. And then aside from that, when they're in their day-to-day, when they're in their 9-to-5 job, at a desk working to, whether it's engage donors or keep the books or do the marketing or any of the other overhead functions that need to get done in order to execute and expand the mission, it's really about helping to define that role and helping them to understand how that role, no matter how mundane it might seem, impacts the mission downrange. So it's about connecting that dot from why keeping the books threads all the way back to that person whose home just got destroyed by a tornado, or the person who is the office manager and makes sure that the coffee is stocked, which is maybe the second most critical mission at any organization, threads all the way back to that person whose home was just destroyed.
From my perspective, I think one of the most important things in terms of getting that energy out there is by establishing trust. And I think establishing trust on all levels. So your donors, so your volunteer base really needs to know that they trust in how you run your business and how they can be engaged. I would also say that your board, getting your board to trust you is very key, because the board opens doors, the board makes a lot of things happen, and the board supports you. I always say, the board is either your 14-headed friend or your 14-headed monster. It just depends on the day. But they're critical to what we do. And I think that when we look at that energy, then we also have to say, have we shown proven leadership? Have we had things that we have done so that when we set that forward, then they know it's going to happen? And for me particularly, I think the critical, most important thing is the vision. And I think there are a lot of organizations that sometimes struggle with that, especially as they go through change or maturity or growth or decline. It's resetting that vision and really being able to call everybody to it. To your point, in terms of everyone being able to know how they connect the dots to the mission, that mission really is a larger thing, and that's a vision that I think we're all a part of. I mean, we're all here today because we all believe in the same things. And so I think, for me, there's a lot of things I remember throughout my career that I could see and I could hope for, but I almost thought were impossible. And setting the vision for what that could be was really important. I'll give you an example. When I had first come to Susan G. Komen for the Cure, and I interviewed for my job, I said, why do you call yourself For the Cure if you've never funded a clinical trial? And they said, oh, well, I guess that's a good question. And I had come from the clinical trial world, so it just seemed to make sense to me that shouldn't we be giving medicines to patients so then there's the cure? I mean, that's just kind of my question. So that was in 2005. By the time I left Komen in 2015, we had 23,000 women enrolled in Komen-funded clinical trials. So don't tell me that if you have a vision for something that it can't happen.
So I think that's a great point, and I think when you think about vision, one of the conversations that happened yesterday, and I think it was Jeff Shuck with Plenty, he said that sometimes the gap in what you can accomplish in strategy or vision is really just a lack of communication. And so as leaders, how do we pay attention to communication and make that an intentional effort? And I think, it means different things for many. I know at Heifer we tried really hard to make sure that our leadership team was very open and transparent, so there were no surprises with any of the rest of the organization. But we had to be really intentional about it. So I'm curious, and Jake, I'll start with you on this one. How do you ensure really good communications with your team, and is that important in terms of your alignment on strategy?
Yes. Communications is absolutely critical. No organization gets it right, period. End of story. As a leader, accept the fact that the number one complaint you're always going to hear from your team is around communication. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on it, doesn't mean that you can't improve on it, but you can't get wrapped around the axle thinking that, oh, we are failing in this regard and therefore we are failing as an organization. I ask every board member, every advisor, every successful entrepreneur or business executive that I come across what their secret is to internal communication, and every single one of them, without fail, I had this conversation with one of my board members last week, rolls their eyes and says, yes, internal communication, it's the 14-headed monster of our organization. I think that there are some things that you can do. I mean, over-communicating is better than under-communicating. Being transparent, things like open door policies and stuff, those are almost cliche at this point in time, but if you have an open door policy, you really have to celebrate when people use it. You have to drive home that it's real, that people are going to be heard, that action is going to be taken, that you're going to empathize with whatever concerns it is that they bring to you. And it won't just be concerns. If you have a great and real, authentic open door policy, you're not just going to be hearing people coming in with concerns, you're going to be hearing people come in with great opportunities as well. And it's when those opportunities are allowed to bubble up and there's this ability for people to feel safe in coming with a great, crazy idea that the real magic starts to happen internally. There are great tools that are starting to come online, but there's no silver bullet for solving the communication challenge. It just requires people to make an effort. We had our last all-staff meeting in Los Angeles about a month ago. And guess what? Communication was the number one thing that was on the agenda. So we're in the process right now of doing an internal communications audit to try to figure out where the gaps are, where certain teams are succeeding and other teams are failing, and trying to, overhaul all of this again. So I think simply understanding that it will always be a challenge, and so that it always requires attention is, that's kind of half the battle, is just accepting that.
I think that's a great point.
Just to add to that, I come from a very different perspective because I'm not leading a corporation or a large nonprofit, and so my scope is specifically on the kind of individual kind of communication, right? By show of hands, how many of you guys like bullet point emails? Just like get it done, right? These guys up here. How many of you guys like the story? Nobody raises their hand, right? Like you want the story. You want the hey, on a Monday morning, hey, how was your weekend, right? Kind of like interaction, right? Strengths finders and tools like this, not Strengths finders isn't the only tool out there, but these kinds of tools help you understand how your team wants to be communicated to. That's huge, right? Because if I get an email from somebody, and I'm a story guy, right? If I get an email and that just says, hey, Danny, I need this, 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 and this, I'm like, well, do we have to like talk something out right now? Did I do something? Did you not get enough coffee this morning? Like, we got to, right? And so I think all of that communication, it comes down to kind of an individual level between manager and employee, direct reports to volunteers. It's kind of, who are your people? Who are your people and what do they need? And then how do you manage up? For some of you kind of in a different situation, what does boss need? What do I need to do to communicate effectively and efficiently? Because when you do, you save, I like to say, lots of calories, right? You save a lot of calories kind of going back and forth on having to say the same thing 3 times, right? If I know how to communicate with my manager and my manager knows how to communicate with me and vice versa, all of a sudden we have an opportunity to really make the world kind of spin, you know what I mean? And be on top of it.
Absolutely. I would tell you one of the best quotes that someone I've worked with in HR for a long time said to me. She said, feed the dog the way the dog wants to be fed. And she's right about that. And that's exactly what you're speaking to, because I think that's also a part of, trying to be a leader and come in and tell people how you like to be communicated with. I mean, I pretty much say I'm actually really a horrible emailer. I think email's outdated, and then everyone's like, what? How can you think email's outdated? I'm like, I don't know, snap me. It's such a strange thing to hear, right? But, for my teams in the past, what's worked for me when we had those challenges is I turned it over to them. I said, okay, then you tell me. You, this week or this month or however you want, you, the outcomes and research team, are responsible for gathering the information and for communicating it in the way that you think you would like to have it received. And so what we ended up coming up with was a little bit of a hybrid where we had, bullet points here, we had, highlighting stories a certain day of the week, but it became a shared accountability and it became a shared responsibility. And I think that's also the other thing, about open door policies and things like that. I think that's very important. And the way I really look at it and the way I explain it to my teams is that, I may be the CEO, but that doesn't really mean that I do that much different than you. It just means that my level of accountability is going to be much higher. And so at some point, we're all working on this together. We're all working on the same things, but there are so many things that I have no ability or expertise to do that you all on these teams do. And so I think, that is the key to communication is of course, is listening first, right? Is hearing what the need is. And so I'm glad to hear you say, Jake, though, that it's a challenge for everyone, because I think everyone feels like they're alone in it, like they're alone struggling, not able to do it. But I think that's really where the team approach comes in.
I wanted to add something. I revisited this great analogy the other day. I'd heard it before, but I read an article recently in the last couple of days that brought it up again. But and it's this: it's good leaders play chess. Good leaders play checkers. Great leaders play chess. And it's a lesson that I learned early on, and it goes back to communicating with people on the level that they want to be communicated with. If you're playing checkers, every piece is the same. Every piece can only be moved in the same way, and that's as simple as the game is. But when you're playing chess, every piece is unique. It has different advantages, different strengths, and obviously different weaknesses as well. If you understand that, then you can maximize the battle space or the board. And in order to really get to a level where you're playing chess, you really have to truly care and love the people that you're leading. You really have to get to know them on an individual basis, and it can't just be window dressing. When you're talking about that Monday morning, and an employee can tell when a boss or a manager or a leader is asking them how their weekend went, but doesn't really care what the answer is. And that is really the difference between being an effective and authentic leader and being someone who simply has a title. Truly caring about the people that are in your charge and doing everything you can to maximize their impact from 9 to 5 so that their lives after that 9 to 5 are happier and more fulfilled.
One of the things that research shows is that there's going to be more integration between work and life, and that kind of integration. So work is life. It's no longer, I go home at 5 and then I have my real life. It's work becomes life. But to your point, I think the kind of paradigms that I keep going around with leaders is transactional versus transformational. And there's a fundamental difference. We need to get work done, absolutely, but I care more about you as an individual and your growth and your development that I'm willing to take that time. It's going to take a little bit extra time for me to sit down with you and talk with you and about your professional goals, but when I do, your reward, that extra time, that little bit of extra time on those conversations will have dividends. And I kind of have this hypothesis. I wonder if you as leaders can try it out this year, and then let's talk about it again at the collaborative next year. But I think as leaders, if we have kind of an open hand philosophy on people, I think you'll see them work a little harder for you. Rather than saying, hey, I want to keep talent in my office and in my door. What if we begin to say, where do you want to go? What do you want to be? Do you want my job in the future? Let me help you get there. Do you want to be over here? Let's get you there. Let me do whatever I can in my possibility as leaders going, let me invest in the next generation on going, I want you to be the next CEO. I want you to be the next CFO of my organization. Let me figure out how to do that. Or maybe some other organization, because when they go over there, we all win, right? We all win.
Absolutely. I think, the themes here are phenomenal. One, the playoff of what you just said to me is the idea of abundance. And we've heard a lot about that in several different panels, and the idea that, we can all help each other. And as leaders, I think that's really important because, it is important to look at our teams and align talent and help people, be their best selves. I think that's important. The other thing that all of you've said that I think good leaders do really, really well is be vulnerable about how you want to be treated or how you want to be communicated to, because that's just as important, and that rubs off on the teams that you lead. So, Chandani may not be okay with a long story, but when you communicate with you need that story. And I think being okay with saying that as a leader and articulating our own needs is really important too, because then it gives license to everyone on the team to feel like they can do the same. And I think that's really important.
And I think also to that, and explaining that, is also to explain to them why. Maybe I just process information visually or a different way, and that we know that, right, about how people take information in. But I think almost to put out the directive of this is how I like it is different than saying, okay, I like it like this because frankly, if you give it to me the other way, I'll lose it or I'll forget it or and it really opens up kind of for the best team that you can build, which is a team that complements, the things that I don't have, right? And so I think that if you're looking at a team of all completely homogenous people with all the same talents, you're looking at an assembly line, and that is not what a high-performing team would look like. And so I think that adding that personal vulnerability is to say, okay, this is why I need the story or why I don't or why I respond to you this way or when I'm available, helps people understand the basis of who you are. Because I think oftentimes as leaders, we feel like we're not supposed to be as open. We're supposed to lead, so we're supposed to stay over here. But I think that it's actually the opposite. People need to get to know us too. And I think one of the best executive coaching advices I got kind of in a women's group was they were talking about just how the small things make a difference and talking about how when the CEO walks down the hall in the office, through the cubes, down different floors, how is the CEO normally traveling? Probably pretty fast with signing papers on the side and, texting and tweeting and whatever. But what does that say to the people who are working diligently around them? What does that say? Oh, that the CEO is too busy for you right now? And so we did the exercise. I went back and I quit doing that. I quit texting and walking, quit running into stuff. That was good. And then I stopped and I got to see the faces of the people that were working. And I slowed down and I just walked. And maybe I was 5 minutes late for my executive team meeting. But you know what? My executive team got to see me all the time. So it's a small kind of things about really, authentic leadership and being present, I think, that really do help.
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that, and I talk to leaders about this a lot, how you show up matters. And sometimes, in the frenzy of a moment or in the frenzy, you don't understand that you as a leader set the climate for the room. And you may not know that when you're you're not smiling or you're not engaged, or that matters because you're setting the tone And people don't know how to respond to that if they don't know your style or your awareness of how you show up. And I think that's really important. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, just one of the things I like to say a lot is that you are your greatest product.
Yeah.
Right? And what that means is you need to take care of yourself. And you need to know how you communicate, what your wake is. If you're a boat, like the wake of your boat, right? So there's all these different things. And I think even as leaders, if you guys are taking notes or if you want to actually implement some of these things, is ask yourself, in the next 7 days, what will I do to take care of myself? Right? Even that self-awareness of going, I just run around, like texting, and I run into things, and people don't see me. I don't see them. Even that kind of awareness. Or what's your plans for Friday night? How will you recharge? Because if you're exhausted constantly and continually, you will be running a sprint, not a marathon.
Yeah.
And this idea of social good and social innovation is a marathon, people, right? And we need to work. We need to take care of ourselves because the world is looking for it, right? And we need to continue to figure out how do we take care of one another? How do we take care of ourselves? Because when we do, we can have maximum impact. I truly believe that.
Agreed. So I think we have about 15 minutes left, 20 minutes. But I want to ask another question of the panel. It's a bit irreverent, but I'm going to ask, how important is sense of humor? Because I talk a lot to leaders about just how valuable that is, because sometimes, it shows the softer side. And so would any of you like to take a stab at talking about personality and sense of humor and how that breaks barriers?
I think it is very inappropriate to be funny, and that is such a horrible question. I am leaving the stage. You know what? I think one of my favorite job descriptions I ever see, and that I had taken once, was it was like a job requirement that you had to have a sense of humor. And I guess I feel like we work really hard, but we have to have fun. I mean, this is our life. And kind of to the point of like life and work together. I mean, my model is not, it isn't a normal 9-to-5 model. It isn't. I mean, and it isn't. Diane is a person that works for me. She's sitting right here, and she's amazing and phenomenal. And she and I have to leave at 2:30 every day because we have 7 children amongst us that we got to get places. And that's part of our life. And we kind of laugh about it because we're sort of like, well, today we came to work in our yoga pants, and we didn't know we had that meeting with that, whatever. I mean, it's life. Have fun. Have fun doing what you do well, and enjoy the people around you. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's funny. Chandani mentioned it's like I think you called it a job requirement. We ask every single applicant that we're interviewing for a full-time job to tell us a joke. At some point, we'll have like this series of super serious standard interview questions, and then we'll cut somebody off. We'll be like, "Tell me your best joke," and people get totally taken off guard by it. But you'll see, first of all, how they react to that, but then also, like, what kind of sense of humor do they have? If they don't have a joke, we ask them for their favorite Dumb and Dumber quote. The most disappointing part of the last 7 years of my life is realizing how many really young people today have never seen Dumb and Dumber. It's tragic. I asked somebody that. She didn't have a joke. She had never seen Dumb and Dumber. I hired her. Thank God, she was great. But her mom, she went home and told her mom about the interview afterward. Her mom couldn't believe she hadn't seen Dumb and Dumber, so bought her Dumb and Dumber and forced her to watch it before the first day. But I think it's important. The reality is that the work we all do it's very important. It can be very serious. We often find ourselves taking on kind of the gravity of the issues that we're facing, whether it's some sort of abuse, or whether it's poverty, or whether it's natural disasters like we work in. And often you can get that. You can feel that emotional toll. It's draining. And so sustainability, your own individual sustainability, how do you recharge? How do you take care of yourself? You have to be able to have some level of gallows humor and all of that. And I think we've built a really fun atmosphere at Team Rubicon that really encourages people to understand the enormity of the issues that we're facing and the vision we have for tackling it. But at the end of the day, also ensuring that, hey, we know when to unplug, we know how to have fun. And ultimately, that's not just fun for fun's sake. We believe that has a direct impact back on our ability to have impact in the mission.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just don't need to take ourselves so seriously. We're not that important. So I think that's one thing. And then I just want to add, and I'd love to get to some questions, but I have 2 jobs when I'm coaching somebody. One, to make them laugh, or to make them cry. That's like my litmus test. If I do any of those, I've like made it. Like I've done it. Like my job is done. Mic drop, right? So, but I think there's a real like human element to that. I think that's super important, right? What do we resonate with, and what just makes us crack up? Because I think that's so important. It brings down the barriers, and it's so important for communication when we can just kind of have that authentic self shine through. So, yeah.
Let's take a poll in the audience, and how many of you think sense of humor is really important? That's unanimous. Yeah, great point. So, Tori, with that, we'll open it up for Q&A. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mariana from America Needs You. I have two questions. You can answer whichever you like. The first is around transparency. You talked about transparency, and I was wondering what you think should and should not be transparent. For example, we've been having conversations about things like salary bands, which are something staff talk about, whether we have them transparently to everyone or not. And the second is when it's time to move on versus when it's a turnaround coaching situation, and how to kind of align on that as a senior team.
You want to take the second one?
Sure, I'll take the second one. You want to start then?
No.
That's for
Yeah.
You mean moving on, or yeah? Well, I've always heard the phrase that burnout can't be healed; it can only be prevented. And so I think sometimes as leaders, you have to be able to watch your teams to know, are you going to lose top talent? Or are you going to lose top talent because you burned them out? Or are you going to lose top talent or any talent because you've grown them and it's time for them to move on? I think one of the greatest joys a leader would say is that when you get to that place where people can take your job or they can move forward, for me, that's joy. That tells me that I, as a leader, was able to help in that process. So I think that's I think important. In terms of transparency, I'll be interested to hear what people say in other areas, especially working in turnarounds and working in difficult situations, having to make a lot of staffing decisions. Essentially firing a lot of people at a lot of times. Transparency is key. Because if people don't understand why you're doing what you're doing and why it relates to the mission, you're sabotaging your entire culture. I'll tell you that I have before stood up as a CEO and shown my entire staff a very important financial slide that would have been paid very highly for by the New York Times or the Washington Post or et cetera. And I said to the team, I normally would never show this because everyone would be worried it would be leaked to the press, but I'm showing it to you because you need to know what the situation really is. And now when you go back to your desk and you know what the decisions have to be, that slide is going to add up or not add up, and you're going to see a lot of things in the red that are in the red. And if you leak it to the press, then I'll confirm it. But I'm asking you to not leak it to the press, please. So, in tough situations like that, I do think that transparency is key, because I think it's also a part of how else can your team really understand what you as an executive have to make a decision about without knowing.
I think when transparency is, yes, I think the more information people have, the when you can color the what with the why is always critical. The transparency, the internal transparency question that every young entrepreneur has to answer is pay bands and salary. And I'll tell you that this is probably the one area where pure transparency early on does more harm than good. You have in young startups, getting talent is very hard, and you're going to be paying you're going to be paying market rate for some talent in some roles because they're mission critical. You're going to be paying sub-market rates for other talents because they're willing to come in and take a pay cut to come and execute that mission because it's their passion. It takes years often for those to normalize into pay bands. And you have to have somebody who's really good either in HR, or you yourself have to be really tuned into this as a young executive to start identifying these outliers in these bands for different roles and functions and then responsibilities, and start really trying to normalize that before you can start to get transparent. Now, at the end of the day, your most highly comped executives, their salaries are going to be public information, and you have to be willing to stand behind whatever it is that you're paying yourself and your top execs, and hopefully you should be able to make the argument for why that compensation is happening. But I would say, I would argue against being fully transparent about comp until you can normalize those things. And people just have to understand. Otherwise, I'd always default to treat them like adults, and they'll usually live up to that standard.
I think to add to the first question, I think it was about how to know when to move someone out versus cultivate them. And I think that's one of the hardest jobs as leaders, especially as we do change management and we talk about high-performing teams, because there will be some that won't be able, not because they aren't talented, but because they're no longer a fit for a role that may or may not be there. And the CEO of March of Dimes talked about that yesterday, and just how hard that is as leaders. But I think it's one of the most productive things that we can do, because if you have a weak member of the team, it can actually affect the personality and climate of the whole organization. So I had someone tell me once, hire slow but fire quick, and it's not meant to be harsh, but it's just sometimes the energy you put into that can be incredibly long versus finding someone that actually can fill that spot and take off running.
Hi, good morning. My name is Corey McDonald. I'm the founder and COO of the Carotidemia Research Foundation. And quick note on humor, if you ever want to feel really uncomfortable but laugh at the same time, get a whole bunch of us blind guys together and a couple of drinks and we start telling stories. My question is this. The framework of our organization is a little different in that we are all volunteer, so we can't fire anybody. Every single person on our board either has this eye disorder or has a spouse with it or a child with it. So it's a very passionate thing for all of us. It also pulls us into a very tight family dynamic. So the question is, when it comes to being able to sort out weaknesses and strengths and trying and having to give the hard talk to a certain person as opposed to being able to just fire them and move on, how do you approach that type of situation?
Well, it's a myth that you can't fire volunteers. You can and you have to. And I'll tell you, it's harder to fire a volunteer than to fire a staff member, even though one isn't relying on you economically, because at least there is some transactional nature to an employee-employer relationship. But it is incumbent upon you as a leader to fire volunteers who are not performing up to whatever the expectation is. So part of that is really creating an environment where you establish roles and expectations for those volunteers. You have very clearly defined standards of excellence that they need to meet, and when they don't meet them, at the end of the day, if you are truly aligned around a mission, and that mission, it's there, it's communicated, and everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. When somebody's rowing in the opposite direction, or is countercultural, or any of those things, you have to move on, and those are the most painful breakups by far. They really, really are, because that person is giving their time free of charge because they are passionate about what they're involved in. But sometimes you just got to do it. You got to make the tough choice.
And I personally would also say that I resonate a lot with the question that you've asked, because I've worked in cancer in most of my career. And so it is really, really difficult to fire a cancer survivor or someone who is experiencing the disease that we're fighting against. It doesn't mean that it hasn't been done. It has. But to the exact point, it's not about the disease type and whether or not you're experiencing the disease or such, but it's rather about, did you meet the expectations, or are you the right fit? But my heart goes out to you. It makes me also kind of tear up, because it is one of the hardest and really painful things to do, because it feels so counter cultural, right, to what you do. Yeah.
And if you do it in the wrong way, right, that can be devastating to the morale of the organization. So it is delicate, but
it's delicate, and again, the transparency of why you do it has to be understood.
Hi, I'm Jenna Leschuk from 826 Boston. Thank you all so much. Can you hear me okay? So my question is more on the hire slow part of what you've just been talking about. So what are your red flags or maybe green flags for candidates you make sure that you are certain of before you make a hire?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about talent, we have to broaden our scope of what talent means. It doesn't mean that they're just like good coders or something like that, but there's so many different ways of looking at talent, right? It could be emotional intelligence, it could be communication, it could be strategy, it could be teamwork, you know what I mean? So I think we have to look at those kind of specific ways of talent. I don't think there's a silver bullet to hiring. It really isn't. I think, but I think what you can do is have like a template of, or have a database of great questions to ask, and ask for specific things within the job description, not the title, right? Because the title is one thing, but what they're going to be doing every single day, and find examples of ways in which they have already executed that, or have already seen it work out in their own lives or in their previous job experiences. Hire for that. Also, too, don't hire for resume. Although that's important, right? I'm getting my PhD right now, so, but don't hire for resume only, hire for talent, right? Because you can give them experience, you could give them opportunities, and they're gonna get that. But if they're in the right seat, in the right spot, then you have an opportunity for success.
So we've had a couple of different evolutions that we've gone through. We've always had a mantra, passion trumps talent, but culture's king. So that goes to the don't hire resumes, don't hire pedigree. I don't care what university you went to. I want to see passion, and then I want to see culture fit. Culture's king of all. Early on, one of the mistakes I think leaders often make is they're afraid to surround themselves with strong leaders because they're not confident in their own ability. Early, when we were building out kind of the foundation of our team, we had a couple of questions we would ask. We would ask ourselves, well, our founding story, we went up and we went down to Haiti 4 days after the earthquake, myself and a handful of friends. So it was very spur of the moment, very much a bias toward action. So we would ask ourselves, if we had called this person on January 14th, 2010, would that person have dropped everything and followed us to Port-au-Prince? So that indicated if the answer was yes, then this was the type of person who was willing to take risk and would take chances. Then we would flip it around and we would ask ourselves, if that person had called us on January 14th, would they have been the type of leader that we would have followed to Port-au-Prince? And those were the types of people we wanted on board. I wanted to surround myself with people who were, better leaders than I was, so that I could learn from them. And that was the type of vanguard that we wanted to put together. Then I'll tell you this, we kind of have almost a veto power that we grant people internally, culturally. So, a great example, we're searching for a CIO right now. And we've retained a search firm. It's a big hire for us. And we had the search firm brought in a candidate. And this person had already been through, I think, 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. Came into the office, and my HR director, who is absolutely fantastic, met him and walked him over to the conference room where we were going to go and meet with him. And we went in, we had an interview. It was a great interview. I mean, we weren't about to hire the guy on the spot, but it was a really good interview. And afterward, we huddled after the guy had left, and we were sitting around a table debriefing the interview, and she's like, we can't hire this guy. I'm like, why? I mean, there was no red flags for me. She goes, he treated me like the help. As soon as I got in, I was trying to engage with him, and he was instantly asking, well, where's Jake? Where's Art? I thought I was going to be talking to the senior leadership team. And that was like basically a $10,000 no, because this was the final candidate from this search firm. So, but at that point in time, the discussion was over. If you don't respect everybody in the organization, from the person who's answering the door for us all the way up through me, then we've got no room for you.
And just to add to that, Jake, like I think that just shows your courage in that, right? Because these decisions we make are extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And so in that point in time, you could have easily been like, well, we're too far. We have to, right? And you just had one interaction, but everything else looks perfect. And so I think it's really paying attention and being relentless to create that healthy culture. Yeah. It's really good.
One of the practices we used to do is we would take, and I give this advice, take the candidate out for dinner or for lunch. Because to Jake's point, how people treat those around them is a really good indicator of the kind of employee and the kind of team member you're going to have internal in your organization. So it's a different way of approaching interviewing.
My approach and the kind of work I've had to do, I strongly believe in hiring people that are like way smarter than me, which is not really hard to find, but I do. And I think also as a young leader, I had to be comfortable with the fact that A lot of the people that worked for me were decades older than me, but it wasn't about age. It was that they had decades of experience at for-profits, nonprofits, making all kinds of stuff while I had still been in kindergarten, frankly, truthfully. But I had to learn to myself, that's okay. That I had to learn how to be all right with, where I was at that point in my leadership career. But having those people around me and the successes that we were able to have together, it was definitely not me. And I think we would all say we are really just almost ambassadors for our causes in a certain way. It's our teams around us that really are. So I really do believe in hiring the best of the best, even if it almost intimidates you. Yeah.
One more question, I think.
You got a mic right here. You just say we're repeating on it.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great panel. This is specifically about the remote hires and remote teams. I'm really interested if you can get a bit granular, how you keep that culture up. As you mentioned, being present when you're walking through an office, you're not going to get that possibility to do that. How often are you actually seeing them face-to-face? Have you been able to really engage, create a strong team without face-to-face interaction for extended periods of time?
Okay.
Remote hires?
So, do you want me to repeat
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who didn't hear, it was a question around hiring and maintaining a remote workforce and being present and being able to have the same energy that might exist in an actual office environment.
So I will tell you first, one of the things that is important is to operationally prepare yourself, leadership, whomever has to kind of look at cost centers and budgets, to say that by hiring a remote team, there is a lot of cost savings. There's infrastructure savings, et cetera. So take that money and transfer it to travel, to allowing for face-to-face, retreats, et cetera. We strongly encouraged face-to-face time, as in Skype, or however, FaceTiming on whatever. And so we used a lot of electronic tools to do that. In addition, I think it kind of comes back to hiring the right fit for a remote team. Some people can't work at home alone. That's just the fact. Some people don't like it because it doesn't allow them socialization. Some people don't like it because they become workaholics and they don't know when to stop. And so it's trying to understand the right kind of person. I think also then as the leader, even if my team were hundreds big, I would always interview every single person. I mean, if they actually got to me, then that probably meant that they were going to get the job unless I nixed it, But so then I think that also means maintaining relationships at a different level. That hierarchy really can't be there. Accountability and hierarchy should be there. But I think definitely they need to be able to feel like they could pick up the phone and call me at any time. So that was always the thing, was that you're always allowed to call, text, whatever, Chandani at any hour of the day, at any time you need her. As long as, and talk to your boss about it so that they don't feel like they're being usurped, right? But I also think bringing that team together when you can, quarterly, is actually really important. And sometimes we would do that, in regions. Like if we wanted to go up to where we were at, let's say we were here in Boston, I would have seen probably 6 of my employees that are kind of centered around here, and they'd all come to a conference. So there's a way that you can do it and interact. And then I also think that just on the personal level, personally getting to know those employees is important. It's just a different level because you don't get to see them and ask them how the weekend was. So oftentimes I can think of an employee I had named Michelle, and her parrot was always talking in the background. And so we're like, so how's the parrot? Let him in on the conference call for a little bit. But, it was like we kind of knew when the parrot's birthday was because, we're not in the office together. So I think it's those small kind of touches, but it does definitely take maintenance. It takes maintenance, and if you don't maintain it and you don't let it be, that can be a concern. Clear expectations and accountability also key for that as well.
There's no doubt that you can save money with remote employees, but you'll never save as much as you think you will, because if you don't plow it into face-to-face meetings, then it's never going to work for your organization. So whatever you think you're going to save, cut that in half, because if you're not plowing that back into face-to-face, there's just no, you can't make up for that. A couple of granular things we've tried to do. Whenever we do have big all-staff meetings with remote people VTCing in, we always defer to the remote people first when we're asking questions. That's something that we've just started to ingrain, actually almost recently. And then the other thing, there's a lot of stuff that happens at what we call RHQ, right? And it can be as simple as like little gift baskets around the holidays. If you're doing that stuff and you're not sending those gift baskets to your remote employees, it's amazing how quickly that can tank morale. So just keep those little things in mind that just are basic thoughtfulness things as you're building out a remote workforce.
To cut everyone off, we could probably talk all day, but I'm getting the time sign. So I just want to say thank you to each of you. This has been a really great experience, and thanks to all of you for joining us this morning.